Today's number is 1065, the cycle of the bottom to the top when it comes to the most popular cryptocurrency in the world, Bitcoin. And at the time of this recording, we're in the 1050s. So what could this mean as everybody is piling into gold, silver, and even stocks while Bitcoin is starting to struggle? Is it the beginning of something bigger? Or of course, is this just the start of a breaking the trend that's been known for now well over a decade? Well, in today's video of the Macro Edge here for Pepperstone, we'll take a look at all of that into what is sure going to be a volatile couple of weeks. It's big earnings season, and we've got a lot to talk about right now. See you guys soon. Well, welcome back everybody to Pepperstone's Macro Edge, where we cover the latest macro, dark pool activity from Wall Street, and of course, the market cycles that you need to know. My name's Thomas Atkinson. It's great to have you here, and make sure to subscribe if you like content more like this. Let's go and break down, though, the biggest storylines moving through the markets right now. And one of them has to be, of course, that we're seeing a huge resurfacing of a big discussion around Bitcoin and where it's going to head into the end of the year. Now, as we mentioned at the start of today's video, there is a cycle number that we're starting to come up on. But a lot of people have been talking about the movement of gold and silver in recent weeks, rightfully so. We have two here. And of course, now could we see this beginning of Bitcoin? Often what happens to gold eventually leads through into Bitcoin. And you'll see based on this depressed options trader on X post, there's quite a few people making these calls right now. So why is this important? Well, it comes back to a couple of really key technical levels that we're starting to see appear on the most popular cryptocurrency in the world. The first one is, of course, the 50-week moving average. One of the best moving averages to have in your charts, including the 20 and the 200. We like to see this. And actually, Scottie Pippen, yes, that's Scottie Pippen from, of course, the NBA and the Chicago Bulls in the past, actually posted this one, which I find very interesting. He's so into Bitcoin. But he posted, of course, the similarities of the previous times that we've hit this 50 weekly moving average. Now, on top of that, if we took an anchored VWAP, which we'll do later on today's video from the lows, you'll actually find that we're sitting at around the same level. There's a lot to like about the current zone for Bitcoin, but what's maybe not to like is where we are in terms of the Bitcoin price and halving cycle. Now, most of you are aware of this by now. It's probably the most studied and most well-known cycle in the world, and that always is a problem when everybody starts to pay attention to something, as it's always when everyone knows something that it starts to not work. You can see here around 550 days post the halving period, we tend to see Bitcoin moving up. Now, it's not going to be as big as the previous numbers in terms of percentages. That's due to the law of diminishing returns. But what we have seen recently, guys, is that we're getting close to that point where we either decline like previous cycles, or of course, we start to break the trend. So let's bring this together a little bit more here with some of these charts from Brett_Eth over on X, which is the halving to peak, peak to bottom, and bottom to halving events. So you'll notice that it's kind of categorized by three events. We've got the recovery phase, the halving phase, and then of course the drop phase. And it seems like these have been happening in almost perfect uniformity over the last kind of decade. And this is really important because of course, if this stops working, and let's say Bitcoin moves off and up into the future, then basically this will be one of the biggest, most well-known events that just has stopped working. And it's important to know when those kind of things do occur. So I'd be really interested to know your comments down below, whether you think this is the breaking of the halving cycle, the breaking of the bottom to the top cycle, which is around 1,064 to 65 days, and everything else. So if we are to continue, where should we be by the end of the year? Well, basically, as we approach November and December, there's going to be a very important time here for markets, a decision whether we're going that higher point or lower. And when we look at the charts very soon, we'll kind of see why some of these key levels could show us a lot about flows. Here's another way to put it in terms of the overall cycle. And you'll notice that, of course, we're starting to get close to that 550 kind of area here where we topped back in 2021. And what actually did happen at that point was we topped, we bottomed, then we kind of found the same top, we distributed, and then, of course, we sold off. And you'll notice that these points, especially the end of 2021 and the end of 2018, also coincided with very interesting points in, of course, the stock market, mid-cycle slowdown. So what this was, of course, in the US, there's something known as the presidential cycle. Often the second year, that is going to be 2026 in our case, of a new president, is a little bit shaky. And funnily enough, each one of these cycles is also correlating with that. The other thing is, have we seen a movement in gold, which means that Bitcoin should move up as well? This is a cool chart again from Brett_Eth, and what it shows is a ratio trade. And of course, it's always worthwhile putting Bitcoin versus gold on a chart. And a lot of people are saying, is this a head and shoulders? But what I'm more interested in is if Bitcoin actually rallies up here against gold and goes through this 36 ratio. Because this has stopped it back in 2021. This has stopped it every single time pretty much over the last 12 months, 24 months. And it clearly is a point here to be watching in the crypto markets. If Bitcoin starts to break up against this, then it really shows that that asset class could be on the move. If, of course, it weakens through this head and shoulders, then it could bring, possibly these types of ratios. And that would be that bear case scenario for Bitcoin. So let's have a look now at how gold's going, because these are very linked well together. Now, what is China preparing for? You can see here Steno research shows that China gold stock levels have accelerated at an extreme rate since 2024. And this is something we've discussed here on the Macro Edge for Pepperstone and our Tuesday kind of tactical Tuesdays for quite some time. The last couple of years have been a great time for gold and silver and precious metal assets. There are AI reasons, there are currency related kind of transaction reasons, and of course there are central bank reasons. But if we are to follow some of the previous cycle periods, imagine how crazy gold could potentially go. What we've got right now is already a very, very, very strong bullish uptrend. And actually somewhere around these uptrends in the past, specifically the one from the 1970s, which a lot of people think we're following, we see these huge rallies in gold followed by huge volatility. In fact, gold was up 9 weeks in a row recently. And I'll tell you one stat, which may not come true. The other 4 times that's happened, the 10th week has never been positive. And that is exactly where we find ourselves this week. So it's going to be very interesting to see how gold trades through, of course, this earnings season and the back end of October, often considered one of the most volatile times of the year. So what have we got coming up that could create more spikes in volatility? Well, it's basically earnings, but it's more importantly technology stocks. And Netflix kicks it off here with Tuesday after the close this week, courtesy of Earnings Whispers here, and Tesla are going to move on Wednesday. And according to Earnings Watcher calendar report, you guys will see here the options-based moves are quite large. Now, one of the things that's important about all of these markets is they're all kind of connected. Tesla, if it goes down heavily, may not necessarily instantly affect the market, but if we see a sentiment of some of these tech stocks starting to get concerns about overvaluation, which may not happen at the moment, it seems like everything's meeting expectations, then all of a sudden that can create massive volatility in the S&P. And remember, the key with the S&P is, of course, where it's at right now, which is near those all-time highs. So let's take a look here at some of the things that we're seeing in the markets from the charts. The first one is the advanced decline line, which is an excellent line to have on your charts, is actually showing an uptick right now in stocks as we have seen that volatility into this little bit of recovery. But what we find ourselves at is an all-time high resistance coming into Netflix and, of course, Tesla earnings. And the reason this matters is because as we get closer to these highs, we push something called positive gamma. Basically, as we break through something like a 6750, 6800, we are starting to stack into calls, and Wall Street often has to hedge those positions, creating very strong events. Conversely to this, if we drop this level down here, you'll see that things such as the weekly 20 moving average become very interesting. And here are the options levels for the next 24 hours, but look at the volume and the volatility that's started to appear. See how the volume has spiked back up? That shows you there's a lot of transactions each way. And what we've seen at the top here is a ETF called SSO just saw 3 large dark pool transactions all happening right at this peak level. We also saw 3 or 4 large transactions happen on semiconductors at the same time. We'll look at that in just a moment. But if we are to see a sell-off, where's going to be the first support? Probably around 6,400. The weekly 20 moving average, a well-touched moving average, certainly worthwhile going through and looking at your history of that. And if we are to, of course, keep pushing, we look for a close above the highs, and this continuous dull market may actually continue on. And one of the reasons is the seasonality of, yes, okay, volatility in the end of October, but generally tech stocks having very good runs into the end of the year. Now, with the government shutdown, it complicates things a little bit more. But remember to follow the price action more than necessarily the news stories. If a market is pushing higher and it's pushing positive gamma, then you're probably looking at a market that is pretty strong. Here are the latest kind of gamma reads. You can see 6750, 6800 starting to come through. And if we push that higher, you can kind of see that there's a lot of calls that may need to be hedged off all the way to 7,000. So it actually could get stronger even in the face of a lot of news adversity and also other problems that are going on. The wall of worry is what we call it. For Tesla, you can see 450 is going to be an important level this week with a massive call movement on it. And if we get past that and get a good earnings, it could really start firing up. And Nvidia just has a ton of calls right around the current price. On the option side for Bitcoin, though, things get a little bit more interesting. You'll notice here that Bitcoin has a very strong level of puts at around $60 and a very strong level of calls about 70. And 70 corresponds pretty well with those all-time highs, and 60 corresponds pretty well with the recent lows that we've seen. So clearly we're stuck in a range. And if Bitcoin's going to, show us strength, there are two possibilities we'll look at in a moment. For gold, it's really all about 400 and 405 on GLD contracts. So quite a lot to look into there. But for now, the markets are, while very volatile, especially in gold and silver, there are clear levels that if broken could actually still create quite a lot of strength. So let's move over to the precious metal of gold, and you guys will see volatility has entered the chat once again. It's moved down about 4.38%, then rallied back up, and it's on a very strong trend. The best replication seems to have come from the 4-hour 20-moving average so far, and you'll notice that was another spike down on Friday that's rallied the market up to highs. But just remember, guys, in technical world, if it doesn't make a new higher high, then comes back down and touches that again, it is weaker than it was last time. And of course, if it then goes underneath here, which is about 4,200, it opens up the possibility of going back to the 4,000 level. And the 4,000 level is, of course, key here because it is the daily 20-moving average plus the previous level of demand. So clearly, volatility is back here in gold. In silver, it's something similar, a massive sell-off, a huge dark pool transaction coming through. I think the 8th largest of all time coming in just at the highs here. And again, what is a dark pool? It's a massive transaction from Wall Street where they do it between entities. Rather than doing it on market, they make a deal with another large entity. They do the transaction. Yes, there's a buy and a sell, but ultimately someone's usually pretty well informed. And after that, we saw a big sell-off. So what I kind of think here is that we've seen a peaking of at least initial euphoria, and possibly, now we move on to what happens next. Of course, we probably expect a bit of a slowdown in gains and more of a volatility in a sideways style action. When we move over to the Nasdaq, the S&P and the Nasdaq are showing something very similar. The Nasdaq went down, then rallied straight back up, and it has hit this first major resistance ahead of Netflix earnings. So Netflix and Tesla will be in focus. Again, we break and close higher. Markets can start to squeeze on the upside. And just remember that famous quote, markets can stay irrational longer than we can potentially remain solvent. But I think the most interesting chart this week has to be this one here, Bitcoin. And we'll actually go here where I've prepared a couple of key levels to look at. First up is the anchored VWAP off this level. That's where we found buying pressure before. Now, if you're looking at this chart, you'll notice it doesn't look very healthy. In fact, a lot of people are saying this looks like a Wyckoff, a buying climax, a UT, and a UTAD. And this is, of course, what we call a pretty strong market, but at the same time, something that has made kind of just slightly higher highs and then is starting to potentially distribute. Now, for Bitcoin, an important point is coming up. This low level, which is around 98K, and the 100,000 level, which is also the weekly 20 moving average, which has been the one that, of course, Scottie Pippen also had in his charts. Not sure where he got that from, but maybe he's using, who knows, maybe he's using Pepperstone with the Trading View charts. So over here, you can see Bitcoin, it's obviously declining and it doesn't look very healthy just yet. But if you're looking towards flows, there are really some scenarios here. Maybe a weakness into a steal into a rally. Now, if that happened, it's very strong. Of course, weakness with continued weakness and no bid, that's very weak, and that could be the end of the cycle. That's, of course, the worry for a lot of people. And then there's strength right now past 116,500-ish level, and that takes a new high out and hopefully gives us a new higher high. There's clearly some stuff that's really interesting on this chart. And of course, you need to be breaking it down and practicing a lot of risk management along the way. So guys, to summarize right now, I think it's such an interesting market dynamic. We've got everything going on with gold and silver that's caused almost a parabolic hyperbole kind of trend. On the flip side of this, we've got something that usually does come after gold starts to kind of go sideways, which has happened a few times, which is Bitcoin. Bitcoin is at that precipice. Will it follow every other cycle and potentially see a topping pattern right now? Or are we going to buck the trend and change what is probably the most studied thing in the world when it comes to finances? It's going to be such an interesting time, and I hope that you'll join us in the next episode of the Macro Edge in 2 weeks. And of course, for Tactical Tuesdays next week, where we'll talk about everything to do with markets. Remember to subscribe down below and let us know what your opinion is in Bitcoin's next move. Is it all the way up to 150 or even 200K where Tom Lee thinks it could go? Or are we about to see the beginning of the end and get a really low price? Let us know. Thanks so much. Bye for now.